Jackhammer is fun. Like, really fun. Its damage is extremely high, it takes a lot of skill, and there's a lot of new tech that you can learn from practicing with it. But sadly not many people bother using it. I guess it is hard to transition from the shotgun to the Jackhammer, especially since by the time you get the Jackhammer, your muscle memory is used to the shotgun. But even then, the Jackhammer is still worth using because learning new things and trying different playstyles makes the game so much more interesting. It's also so satisfying to use as well. It's fun to learn, its damage output is insane, and the hit stop it does when hitting an enemy is just perfect. I'm hyping this weapon a lot, so let's get into the actual video. What does the Jackhammer even do? The Jackhammer, or the alt shotgun, is the last alternative weapon in the game, and it can be found on the dead body of an excavator in 7-2 Light Up the Night after pressing the 3 buttons in the violence layer. The primary fire of the Jackhammer is identical for all 3 variants. It will pull the piston of the Jackhammer back, and if holding primary fire, the piston will release if the primary fire is released, dealing damage to enemies in melee range. It's also able to break idols and gutterman shields. The damage from the primary fire is dependent on speed. The gauge on the left side of the hammer shows 3 colors, green, yellow, and red. Green being the slowest and red being the fastest. If you hit an enemy when the gauge is at green, which only happens if V1 is standing still, walking, or dashing, the Jackhammer will deal 3 damage and V1 will be sent back slightly. If the gauge is at yellow, which happens if V1 is sliding, jumping, falling, or whiplashing, the Jackhammer will deal 6 damage, and V1 will be sent pretty far from where the enemy was hit. It will also do a hit stop that lasts for about 0.2 seconds. Finally, if the gauge is at red, which happens if V1 is dash jumping, sliding fast, slamming, or whiplash cancelling, the Jackhammer will deal 10 damage, and V1 will be sent flying away. It will also do a hit stop that lasts for half a second, and the Jackhammer will be put in cooldown for 7 seconds. We haven't even gotten to the alt fires for the Jackhammer, and the damage is already really strong, but it's going to get even better. The first variant of the Jackhammer is the core eject Jackhammer. When alt firing with it, it will release a core that will launch in front of V1. It cannot be aimed unlike the core eject shotgun, but it will follow the movement of V1. When releasing the primary fire shortly after launching a core, the Jackhammer will turn the core into a hit scan explosion attack that will deal 7 damage, which is pretty high for an explosion. Since it's hit scan, it can also be fired at coins to have the hit scan explosion auto aim at an enemy. Next, we have the pump charge Jackhammer. The alt fire will pump the Jackhammer and will increase the pressure of the Jackhammer each time it is pumped. The first pump will release a shockwave that deals 3.5 damage the next time the primary fire is used. The second pump will still deal 3.5 damage, but will increase the size of the shockwave. And the third and last pump will release a large red explosion that deals 7 damage, which means that it can damage the player and it can damage any enemies that are normally explosion proof, like soldiers or Maurices. If you add the max damage of the primary fire of 10 and the 7 damage from pumping the alt fire 3 times, the weapon can deal up to 17 damage, which is a lot. Lastly, we have the Sawed-On Jackhammer. Holding the alt fire of the Sawed-On Jackhammer will rev up the chainsaw, which deals 4.5 damage per second, and when releasing alt fire, the chainsaw will fire and bounce back towards V1, dealing 4.5 damage every time it pierces an enemy. The feedbacker or the Jackhammer primary fire is able to bounce the chainsaw back and forth. If the chainsaw is hit by the knuckle blaster, the chainsaw will detach. It behaves identical to the chainsaw on the Sawed-On shotgun. Now that I've explained what the Jackhammer can do, let's get into the crazy tech that it's capable of. First off, the primary fire of the Jackhammer. Remember how I said how the primary fire of the Jackhammer can fire hit scan cores? Well, not only that, but the primary fire can also be used on rockets to fire a hit scan explosion that also deals 7 damage. The primary fire of the Jackhammer can also shotgun parry enemies at close range, which is useful for enemies like Virtues, Maurices, or sentries. Since there is a hit stop when using the primary fire at yellow or red speed, you can sneak in a Knuckle Blaster punch to deal an extra 2.5 damage. This will allow you to be able to deal up to 12.5 damage when going at max speed, which is strong enough to insta-kill a sentry. Next, we have the Core Eject Jackhammer. The hit scan core explosion itself is extremely strong. 7 damage from the hit scan core is nothing to scoff at, as its damage is equal to 2 projectile boosts with the shotgun. The cores reload pretty fast too, so you can just fire another hit scan explosion after 2 seconds. Another powerful tech you can pull off with the Core Eject Jackhammer and the rocket launcher is to freeze a rocket and then fire the hit scan core at the frozen rocket to cause a mini nuke that can deal up to 10 damage, which is very strong for an explosion. Though the Jackhammer seems like it's mostly for single target damage, the Core Eject Jackhammer is strong for both single and multiple target damage with all of the tech it has. Next, we have the Pump Charge Jackhammer, and I would argue that it is the best stand-alone weapon. Its damage output is extremely high for a weapon by itself. An extremely powerful tech with the Pump Charge Jackhammer is to pump it once, whiplash an enemy, hit the enemy, sneak in a Knuckle Blaster punch, and repeat. Since the Jackhammer only goes on cooldown if the gauge is at red, the whiplash makes sure the gauge is at yellow, so then you can spam the Pump Charge Jackhammer with the Knuckle Blaster to deal an insane amount of damage to enemies. Not only that, but the third pump of the Pump Charge Jackhammer is extremely powerful as well. The red explosion from the third pump is extremely satisfying and rewarding to pull off when using it in a horde of high health enemies. Lastly, we have the Sawed-On Jackhammer. The most common tech to pull off with the Sawed-On Jackhammer is to release the chainsaw at the same time you hit an enemy with the Jackhammer. This can deal up to 14.5 damage, assuming the player is moving at max speed and that the chainsaw pierces one enemy at least once. You can also punch the chainsaw at the ground with the Knuckle Blaster at the same time you release the chainsaw to maximize the chainsaw's damage up 12. The Sawed-On Jackhammer doesn't have as much tech compared to the other two Jackhammers, but its damage output is still extremely high, so it's still extremely powerful and fun to use. I'm sure a strength that you notice about the Jackhammer is its insane damage output. It can shred single target enemies or multiple targets. The high damage along with the tech and the hit stop makes it so fun to use. It's a very strong and fun weapon on its own, and I'm trying to spread the word, because for some reason, so many people don't even bother using the Jackhammer. I guess it's because it's in competition with the shotgun, which is a weapon many people are already used to, but still, the Jackhammer is another extremely fun weapon to use, and not many people realize that. I'm not saying that the shotgun is worse or weaker, but people need to give the Jackhammer a chance. It's a completely new playstyle that makes the game so much more interesting, and there's so much to learn from it. I like the Jackhammer a lot because it's a different weapon that changes your playstyle completely. It forces you to try new things to get better with it, and once you do get used to it, it's so much fun. That's why I love the weapon so much. It's not a stronger version of another weapon, it's not a weaker version of a weapon, it's a different weapon with its own mechanics and tech. If you're someone who's been going all shotguns for a while, I recommend that you at least try the Jackhammers and practice with them. It does mess with your muscle memory a bit, but once you get the hang of it, you might realize that it better fits your playstyle. It is pretty hard to use at first, but after getting better at it and learning all of its tech, it definitely has to be one of my favorite weapons in Ultrakill. But yeah, thanks for listening to me glaze the Jackhammer. See ya.